I'm here today to be talking about the what I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with, which is the statement that the United Auto Workers made about calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Palestine conflict, this slaughter that's occurring in Gaza. This statement was made on December 1st, which was when everybody was more or less on board for the idea of a ceasefire, which there's opinions on a ceasefire at this point vary, if it would be necessarily in the Palestinian resistance interest at this point, especially the current proposition which is on the table by the United States government, Biden talking about a 6-week rearmament, less so a ceasefire for Israel. But I'm just going to read off this statement and we'll get into the significance of this. So on Friday, December 1st, the UAW International Executive Board announced the union was joining a growing number of local organizations in calling for a ceasefire in Israel and Palestine. The Executive Board voted to sign on to a petition drafted by the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America Union and UFCW Local 3000. From opposing fascism in World War II to mobilizing against apartheid South Africa and the Contra War, the UAW has consistently stood for justice across the globe. Region 9A Director Brandon Mansilla said that is why I am proud that the UAW International is today officially calling for a ceasefire in Israel and Palestine. So, a very blanket statement, obviously. A little bit of, I'm sure a lot of us would be more in favor of a directly pro-Palestine statement, of course, but that's the nature of politics, if it were. But a ceasefire demand in December 1st was kind of a big deal. It made a fair bit of headlines. And to more explain how a union, which traditionally, although it was mentioned, they made some statements about South Africa apartheid and the Contra War and everything else, the unions typically don't get involved in this level of discourse. But I think to more understand why the UAW is making a statement like this, we have to look at who's in charge of the UAW right now. That's Shawn Fain. And Shawn Fain ran on a ticket of anti-corruption within the union, reinvigoration of the rank and file democracy within the union, a lot of things that have been completely void from the bureaucratic establishments of the modern union in the United States. On top of that, time and time again, Shawn Fain has talked about one key inspirational figure from within the UAW's long and rich history, that being of Ruther, who was the longest serving president of the UAW. And he steered it at a time when the UAW was still in its infancy. And he very much set the legacy of what we think the UAW really stands for in this modern time. Although, admittedly, by Shawn Fain himself, that idea of the UAW has fallen short for many decades since Rutherford's absence. So getting into Rutherford, he was a son of 2 German immigrants who, in 1907 is when he was born. His father, Valentine Rutherford, was a Teamster, although it wasn't the union, the Teamsters, but he was a horse carriage driver in West Virginia, working for the mines. And he was an ardent socialist and a union organizer of the time. Very interesting lineage for Mr. Rutherford. At a young age, he became very impassioned by what he felt was social justice at the time, which of course in the early 1900s was, he felt there was a lot of issues with workers' rights, and also starkingly for a man of his time, he was very much focused on the issues of black workers in the United States and racism, which would serve him very well later in life and in his career. So moving forward, at one point, his father died when Rutherford was very young, and he ended up having to start working. And by the time he was 19, he was recruited by Henry Ford, to go and work in Detroit. And so he relocated to Detroit. going there, and he was one of the youngest machinists in the Ford, all of Ford. He was at 19. At this time, normally you had to have 25 years of experience to be working on the tools and the die casts and everything else at Ford. So Rutherford came from a very working class background and was able to worm his way into a very successful career at Ford, and that should have been the end of his legacy, but the man was emboldened by the ideas of socialism. He was a member of the Socialist Party USA, which was the predecessor to the CPUSA at the time, and he had been radicalized by figures like Eugene Debs, who he personally went to go meet in jail when he was incarcerated for defying conscription during World War I, and speaking out against the war, which was against the Espionage Act at the time, which is why it was enacted. So a lot of interesting background. And in 1927, because of his proliferancy, his skill, if you will, with the machines at Ford, he was sent to the USSR for a period of 2 years to educate Soviet workers about how to implement what was at the time called Fordism, which was essentially the modern understanding of how the assembly line works. So the man, during his time in the Soviet Union, him being an ardent socialist of the time, he was more or less impressed, although later in life he would change some of his opinions on the matter, due to politics, of course. But at the time, he was very interested in the Soviet experiment, if it were, and was very dedicated to his works of trying to educate the Russian proletariat of how to better implement this Fordism and the assembly line and everything else. He took his job very seriously, wrote a series of educational technical pamphlets explaining the ins and outs of how to work the assembly line and everything else. He was a true Renaissance man, being able to bring kind of that knowledge down to the average proletariat in Russia. So fast forwarding to his career with the UAW, the UAW made a lot of attempts to organize Ford at the time, but upon his return to the United States, there was a much more active involvement in trying to organize not only Ford, but Chrysler and General Motors. In 1936, on New Year's Eve, there was a strike called at a Chrysler plant. I believe it was in Flint, Michigan. And Rutherford was directly involved in this strike. He called for, it ended in a series of battles with the local police force. It was referred to as the Battle of Bull's Run, because the cops at the time were called bulls and they all ran away when, meeting the strike line, if you will. And Rutherford was the chief agitator for that action. It was seen as a monumental victory for the UAW. It was sorely needed at the time. And directly after that, there was an attempt to organize Ford, at which point Rutherford was nearly beaten to death by Ford's hired goons, which was a staple of the Ford factory in Detroit. On top of that, in 37, they followed up with a massive strike across multiple plants. They pinpointed a lot of Ford plants, and they did what Rutherford kind of coined the strategy of, which was like a surgical strike in a way. So there were specific plants that were key to the automobile industry. So let's say a specific factory that creates the engine blocks for all the cars. He would strike at that single engine block plant, and with the striking of that engine block plant, render useless the work of all the other plants, and hold that factory hostage until Ford would come to the table and negotiate. And then he would move and do the same thing over and over again. So if we look at the parallels between the, tying this back into the modern, of course, I'm sure the history lesson gets a little boring after a while, the strategies that Rutherford was implementing, we can see very clearly in what was the recent strikes by the UAW just last year. Shawn Fain implemented this surgical strike mentality. He targeted, in Wentzville, Missouri, was one of the first 3 strikes plants to go on strike. They targeted that plant specifically because it is the only plant in the country that manufactures the Chevy Silverado, which is the most profitable vehicle that General Motors creates. So utilizing these surgical strike strategies is in tactic and in its purest form. I'll call back to Rutherford. Beyond that, Rutherford, later in his UAW political career, he started getting heavily involved with the civil rights movement. He believed in an idea that the union does not solely exist as a collection of workers fighting for their rights, but it must actually impact the politics of the state. And because he was a socialist, albeit not really a communist, if you will, or a Marxist, but he was a socialist. And he very much advocated that the UAW get involved in social justice matters. And for him at the time, that was civil rights. And civil rights was probably, one of the most important turning points in American history, at least in the last 100 years. So he was very much involved with MLK. They corresponded frequently. He was very much involved with the civil rights legislation behind the scenes. He was very much a big proponent of this. And on top of that, he made a lot of statements about, he tried to, because of the Cold War and everything, he tried to keep things very sane, but he very much advocated for humanitarianism for other countries, and in a sense of, he was one of the first people to think of the Peace Corps. Of course, the modern iteration of this is not exactly the greatest, but his early ideas of this were very different than its modern implementation. He very much cared about the well-being of the world beyond just the unions. So Fain, of course, is taking a book out of Rutherford for this as well, when he's talking about we must also not just think about the necessities of the workers at home, we must also think about what's going on in Palestine and everything else. He's very much called back to this because it's, once again, it's been sorely missing in the union movement throughout the decades. This is kind of a monumental pivot that Shawn Fain is undergoing, and very true to form with Shawn Fain's rise in ascendancy to the position of president of the UAW. He's very much just thrown the tradition of the last 40 years out the window, and calls back to Rutherford about everything. So, sorry, have to segue here. Yeah, so with both Fain and Rutherford had talked about fears about automation and everything else, because even in Rutherford's time in the 50s, jobs were going by the wayside, going into more automated lines and everything else. At one point, Henry Ford Jr. was giving a tour to Rutherford, and he said, "How will you get these robots to pay their union dues?" To which he replied, "Well, how will you get them to buy cars?" He very much called back to this idea that you can outmode a worker, but I don't know what you're going to do with all that stuff you're producing if you can't continue to provide quality jobs for the consumer. So there was this, and Fain as well has talked extensively about that we shouldn't be afraid of automation in the sense that it's going to replace our jobs, because the worker is essential at the end of the day, not only as in the chain of production, because automation isn't nearly as scary and real as they think it is, but it's also that the people buying the commodity have to be able to afford it, so that means good paying jobs through the union. So fast forwarding to 1947, there was and this ties into kind of communists' involvement with the UAW, because the UAW was a CIO union, and the communists were heavily involved in the CIO. And they were, to a large extent, involved in the UAW. But, of course, Rutherford was not in their camp. And why was that? I mean, I've gone on about Rutherford's socialist past, his socialist upbringing. Why did he never, he even went to the USSR. Why did he never work with the communists? And this was a big failure of the CPUSA in that time period. We're coming in talking about the era of Browderism. There was a series of mismanagements from the CPUSA at the top, very much not looking at the union for what it actually is. At the end of the day, the union is as Rutherford envisioned, this great tool that can be used for social movements, can be used for political change. At the end of the day, though, the union is not going to be able to do any of that if it can't provide for its own membership, if it can't provide meat and potato contracts for its workers. Why would a worker be incentivized to listen to any union boss if at the end of the day his contract doesn't add up for him, right? And I think there's probably quite a few union people in this room who've had similar experiences in the past. We'll do questions at the end, sorry. So I think we all know that more or less. And so Rutherford has this wonderful vision of what the unions can be. Why didn't he work with the communists, right? So he didn't work with the communists because the communists never actually understood that at the end of the day, you can have all of the great political rhetoric, you can have all of the great party programs, you can talk about how great the future will be, but right now and right here, they were willing to sacrifice what was real, actual gains for the working people at these plants, at the factories and everything else, for those long-term visionary projects. They didn't understand that at the end of the day, the union is a body of working people, and it functions to keep those working people in positions that they can continue to live decent lives off of. They failed to understand that situation, and on top of that, they drastically overestimated their influence within these unions. And so in 47, there was more or less a mass purge of communist organizers from within the union. It's kind of the dark era of the Cold War, McCarthyism before McCarthyism. Rutherford went very deep into getting all of the CPUSA adjacent membership out. It's a dark legacy of the UAW. It's born out of incompetent strategy from the CPUSA itself. And it's an unfortunate reality that's why even today, the Communist Party doesn't have nearly the pull and power that it does within the union movement, something that should, quite frankly, be a natural ally to it. I believe it was Vladimir Lenin who said that the unions are just schoolhouses for communists. You know, that's the reality of the situation. Trade union consciousness is just that close to becoming class consciousness. It's that close to becoming, from the ranks of the union, members of a communist cadre, if you will. So how, with a modern Rutherford, that being Shawn Fain, how do we approach the modern union movement? How do we approach figures like Shawn Fain? When he does good things like objectively what he did about Palestine on December 1st, objectively a good thing. But once again, I feel like the lesson hasn't been learned from 47. The lesson hasn't been learned from the Rutherford era, because when I get involved in the conversation, time and time again, well, that's not good enough. He didn't go far enough. He didn't support Palestine enough explicitly. He didn't do this. He didn't do that with the contract a monumental contract that he won, by the way, with the big three automotive industries, for the UAW and for the working members of the Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. The problem I find with this once and once again is that it's almost this idealistic understanding, once again, that they don't understand that the union exists first and foremost to support its membership. That is the primary thing. With that support from the membership and that feedback of the workers from within the union, the rank and file, actually caring about what their union leadership has to say because it's provided the meat on their table, do they then actually care beyond the scope of their immediate needs, to care about things like Palestine, to care about things about solidarity and class consciousness? That's the reality of the situation. So once again, when I see this wide discourse within the left, if you will, grant me that, criticizing figures like Shawn Fain and criticizing the union movement in the United States in general, you have to ask once again, it's just, was nothing learned? Was nothing learned from 70, 80 years ago, looking back in this history. And the reality is, I mean, of course, nothing is learned because most people don't even know this history, quite frankly. And it's just, I don't understand why this analysis doesn't ring home. Why the understanding that to even get to the point of a union in 2024, being 2023 in December, being as bold as to actually make a statement that at the time was against the president, when for the past 40 years in this country, the unions have been on the back foot. They've been under assault by the federal government, by NAFTA, by horrible trade deals, everything. The unions have been in full retreat. So the criticism of the boldness of Shawn Fain in the face of this to even demand such a thing as a geopolitical talking point is just quite strange. And I want to once again just go in and say, like, the lack of analysis for the history of the UAW and the trade union movement at large, and the lack of analysis of our place and how to operate within these things is a tragedy for the modern left in the United States. And I hope it's something that Marxists like myself and like I'm sure you good people in the audience can actually learn to move beyond. Because there's a different, Lenin said in Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder that we should work within the most reactionary of trade unions. That blanket statement. He didn't go in to elaborate. That's quite frankly exactly how he said it. The most reactionary of trade unions. They are the organic formations of working class people fighting for their betterment in their class position. That is the proletariat, quite frankly. This is the number one place that you can meet and interact with them. We should be working within them. But it's also a matter of understanding the limitations of the trade unions, which a trade union is not going to be a vanguard party in and of itself. A trade union is a trade union. At the end of the day, it's about providing for its membership meaningful contracts and meat and potatoes. That is what it's about. For us to go in and insert ourselves into these trade unions and like the CPUSA was doing in the 20s, 30s, and the early 40s and things like this, it's not only not appropriate, but on top of that, it's not good strategy. We should go in and we should have conversations and we should assist the unions in what they are trying to accomplish. And from the ranks of the trade unions, maybe we do find people who are worthy, we're trying to bring from a position of trade union consciousness to class consciousness. That's a very real and urgent task that needs to be taken up and accomplished. But the idea of some organizations that exist, that we should go into the trade unions and we should run our own candidates and we should take over the trade unions and we should run the trade, it's infantile, it's nonsense. You work within, you don't co-opt. There's a distinct difference. And it almost goes back to what a good friend of mine, Carlos, talks about, which is the purity fetish. The unions, by their very nature, are going to have impure politics because the unions exist specifically within the framework of this capitalist system. They exist specifically within their framework of relation to businesses, relation to a capitalist class, which they are seeking to gain concessions from for the working class. But that's as far as it goes. The unions are not revolutionary. They never will be. That's not the purpose of a union. The purpose of a union is to, once again, get the meat and potatoes in the contract. That's what it's about. It's not about revolution. It's a springboard of which that you can draw people into a revolutionary movement. That's all well and good. The unions themselves are not the motor for that. The vanguard party cannot be replaced by a union. So once again, I see time and time again when leftists, I'm a Teamster. In the Teamsters Union, we have a lot of people from organizations come in all the time. And their main attempt is to take over the Teamsters Union. That's not good form. That doesn't work. And you do not gain the respect of the working Joes just trying to come in and muck up their stuff. They don't like that. I guarantee it they don't. They respect their space being respected, their working class institution being respected, and they respect hearing you out about politics, and they respect hearing you out about your positions, but they don't respect you trying to co-opt their spaces. That's really meat and potatoes, what I'm trying to get to. And the idea that figures like Shawn Fain, who have already ascended all the way up to the top of the UAW, are going to get co-opted in this way, it's really silly. And lambasting people like Shawn Fain, who are doing amazing work for their membership, does nothing to engender you to the working class people within the UAW. It does nothing to engender you with the working class people who are rapidly being brought in to the UAW, which the UAW, I don't know if anybody knows this, but they're in the process of signing like 13 new contracts with Toyota, Hyundai, all these manufacturers, Volkswagen. They're hitting the scene like things we haven't seen since the little steel strikes in the 30s. It's insane. But this leftist approach of condemnation of everything that these organizations are trying to build is never going to get us anywhere. And it's not going to get us more really good positions on things like Palestine. We should be 100% in support of things that, like what Shawn Fain did about Palestine. We should be 100% in support of what the workers in the UAW accomplished in their strike with the Big Three. We should seek to have conversations, and we should not seek to direct and, quite frankly, harass people about the minutia of contract and, well, you won all of these great things, but you didn't achieve this 1 cent raise in this sector, so the contract's completely bunk. These sort of ultra takes will continue to alienate us from the working class. They will continue to alienate us from the trade union movement, and they will actively harm the trade union movement as well. It is not good for anybody, and it's a practice that should be done away with. And that's really what I'm getting at. Now, can we potentially see, going back to the topic of imperialism, can we potentially see something like this coming from Shawn Fain again? And can we see it growing to more trade unions? Like I said, there was quite a few other trade union movements that had already signed on to the initial statement from December 1st. Are we going to see more reactivation from around this topic? I'm not sure. I think that the current geopolitical landscape would definitely benefit groups like the UAW to continue to embolden on this messaging of being, pro-ceasefire, let's say, a very kind of somewhat neutral stance to where they don't, get on the Zionists' awful bad side, but at the same time, a very clear position that the bloodshed should stop. Are we going to see them make a statement about Ukraine and Russia? Probably not. Very, very hot water they would be getting into for that. But I think there is a chance that if there is further escalation between Israel, from Israel, quite frankly, I think we could see further statements coming down the pipeline. I know, for example, like the Teamsters Union, Shawn O'Brien, another Shawn, president of the Teamsters Union, is on very good relations with Shawn Fain. You could probably potentially see him joining in on this. There's a lot of cross discussions on this matter. Do I hope for another great statement? I absolutely do. I just not sure if it's expedient. Of course, there was the State of the Union address that where Biden unveiled his sort of nonsense idea of a 6 weeks ceasefire, which really is just a 6-week rearmament for Israel to continue its prejudicial slaughter of the Palestinian people. It's not great. And on top of that, during that same State of the Union address, Shawn Fain was present. And he referenced to Shawn Fain, not about the Palestine thing, but about he was using what the UAW's victory was for himself, which was the UAW was able to get, through its negotiations, a manufacturing plant reopened in Belvedere, which Biden signaled as him creating jobs, which in reality it was just the UAW, and he just wanted to take credit for it. Maybe this was some sort of backroom negotiation between Shawn Fain, who had just previously gone very public about calling for a ceasefire in Palestine, Maybe this was part of the deal. Hey, I get to claim that I created the jobs when you did, and we'll throw you a 6-week ceasefire. Maybe that was the deal that was made. Who knows? But it's important to note that Shawn Fain asked for it well before Biden did. Biden suddenly comes around to the idea, and then Shawn Fain on the same night that he announces this also gets to take credit from the UAW for creating jobs. So maybe, who knows? But it should honestly be very inspiring that for the Palestinian resistance movements within the United States and the people who are very much in support of Palestine, it should come as a very reassuring thing that organizations like the UAW are in such a position in the United States, which historically they have not been in a position to make such statements even to begin with. The tide is turning. Overwhelming majority of the population does very much support the Palestinians, or at the very least condemns Israel's atrocities there, which is a hell of a lot better than it has been for many decades in the United States. On top of that, I think if you were to, and I don't think a lot of research has been done on the topic, but I'm sure if you were to do a lot of research, you'd find that I feel that the union rank and file probably has a much better position than even some of the average Americans, because we, as much as people like to kind of denigrate working class, blue-collar Americans in this country, they do have a lot of sense of what is going on geopolitically. They very much pay attention to these sort of things. And they are not very happy with Biden specifically, and they are very not happy with, by that, the actions of Israel, which they do see in a different light than we would probably like them to see. They come to these conclusions a lot because of their distrust of things like the Democrats and stuff along those lines, whereas obviously we would like to give them a much more nuanced understanding of how Israel works and how imperialism works, but they do organically see, what is wrong with the situation, and they do very much voice their concerns about these things. So hopefully moving forward we can continue to have Shawn Fain once again leading this sort of initiative for rank and file involvement with the unions, trying to really get this democratization of the unions going. We can really hope to hear more of the rank and file's opinions about things like ceasefires in Palestine, and hopefully more condemnation of any other imperialist projects that our governments decide to get involved in. And there are with this effort of democratization within the union, I know Shawn Fain has announced a lot of sort of think tanks within the union from rank and file members where they can go and they can have discussions like this. So with the formation of these sort of things, we can definitely see in the future more educational opportunities inside the union for its own membership about these sort of topics. So overall, kind of to close out, I think Shawn Fain's doing a good job. Obviously, we all would love if he was waving the red flag and, declaring general strike or something, along those lines. But I think it's a little idealistic to have such a strange take, and I think we should be quite satisfied and happy with the job that's currently being done. And if we are involved in our own trade unions, we should be pressuring them to make similar statements. But we should do it as members of our unions, not as that crazy communist guy who comes to the meetings once a year or something, So that's my take, and that's my spiel. So there we go. Thank you. Is there any questions? Yeah, what's up?
Yeah. As someone who really respected, to a degree, I do still respect Shawn Fain and everything he did. I actually used some of the language in a couple of UAW contracts to put in our contract that I spent 6 months negotiating last year.
Right.
That process is horrible.
Yeah.
But for anybody, at least in my local, for one, Teamsters kicked us out last year, so. And so they distrust most union upper brass. And
Right,
so
yeah.
what happened when Shawn Fain came out and said he endorsed Biden, a lot of the people in my local who were paying attention to that, they pretty much said to hell with this guy because he's just like the rest. And these are not any sort of communists, so they're just people,
Right.
they're just dudes I work with. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? Like,
No, I 100% understand that. Yeah.
It sucked because as a person who's trying to lead, not lead that, but maybe influence that conversation in a certain direction, be like, oh, well, I had nothing for that. Honestly.
No, I agree. I agree 100%. I obviously, I talked at length about Shawn Fain all throughout the strike and everything else because I was on the picket line. I'm not happy about Shawn Fain's endorsement of Biden, probably just like you're not. Although I do also recognize the fact that he's expected to make an endorsement. I would have preferred he didn't make an endorsement at all. I liked his earlier rhetoric, which was nobody's earned our endorsement. I don't think Biden showing up to the strike line was earning that. I think it was a photo opportunity for Biden. That's Shawn Fain's sort of rhetoric around that. I don't really buy it. I don't blanketly endorse Shawn Fain. I think there's a lot of things, obviously, that I wish were better. I just also very much want to drive home to people to be realistic about these sort of figures because he's leading a campaign within the union to democratize the union, to try and get the rank and file's voices more heard, get people more involved at the local level in their locals and everything else. That is 100% commendable. Hats off to the man.
Yeah.
His politics, whole different story, obviously. The man, like I said, he allowed, quite frankly, I'm more pissed off not just about his endorsement, but the fact that he allowed Biden to claim during the State of the Union that he created these jobs in Belvedere, which we know full well was won by UAW rank and file standing on the picket line and good contract negotiations from business agents. So I 100% agree. Not running cover for that.
It's not even so much my view of it. It's just as a person who was in the middle of that, and a lot of times all I end up doing is just reflecting with the members of my union. I mean, we're not huge. It's like 1,500 people.
Right.
But most of these people, one, quite frankly, don't care about Israel, Palestine. I mean, they don't care.
Yeah.
Israel don't care about Russia, Ukraine.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that their money's being stolen.
Well, and that's actually a very good
that's the only
political talking
in.
point, honestly. Yeah. I mean, that's the conversation I have with guys in the Teamsters Union all the time. Is why is all our money gone? Why are we driving on these shitty highways that haven't been repaved in 50 years? But Ukraine's getting some new missiles. It's a very easy talking point. But yeah, I mean, when I say that the average union worker probably has a higher paying attention to geopolitics, that's still compared to the national average. So I feel that it's quite higher because I have these conversations all the time, but it's still not incredibly high. So yeah, I totally understand that. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I actually do like Shawn. I'm grateful for the language he's been able to put out in these contracts because people like me can use that. I'm not in the auto industry.
Right.
Cola can go anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, actually, a funny story. I was, like I said, I'm a Teamster, and we were looking for cola language for our contract at the time, and I was like, guys, we don't want to put out any preliminary negotiation contract deal, anything. We don't want to put anything else until this stuff with the UAW's done, because I'd love to see what their cola language looks like. Exactly that. So I totally get that one. But yeah. So any other questions? Go ahead.
What do you think of the CPUSA's attempts to sort of enter into the Amazon Workers Union?
Yeah. So I know that Chris Smalls, the Amazon Labor Union organizer, I know he was at some point he was in discussions with some CPUSA people. I'm not super privy to all of the details of that. I would very much give the same exact criticism that I just explained about the Browder era and how their approach to the unions at the time was.
They tried suing him.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Chris Smalls is out here organizing, one of the hardest and honestly very inspiring unionization efforts and campaigns in the last decade was that Amazon labor union organization effort, and its success also. I mean, it's really huge, and the fact that he really wasn't backed by any big players in the unions. I mean, he wasn't, this wasn't a Teamsters project or anything like that. It was specifically, a grassroots initiative to unionize. And why any political organization felt that it needed to 100% control that, I don't understand at all. So when it comes to what you're saying, yeah, I think that's weird. I think that's not only a misstep, but almost record behavior for the Amazon labor union itself. Unions need to be able to assert their own. What is the union besides just an organization of workers getting together to fight for their rights collectively? If that doesn't drill into the heads of its membership, like, we have the power, the capitalist class should be on watch, and we're here, we can actually do this shit ourselves. They can't. There's no way for them to do that themselves if it's co-opted by the Communist Party USA or something along those lines. It's just silly. Wouldn't you want the workers to experiment and test their own power that they already have, and then approach them as people? Don't approach them as the Amazon labor union. It's that simple. And I think this goes back to, once again, that organizations and like the CPUSA, quite frankly, and other organizations across the country that have not had a good track record in being able to remain politically viable over the last several decades, is that they are incapable in a lot of instances of actually having normal conversations with working class people. What they're able to do and exert, the only way they're truly able to exert influence is like this, by going towards organizations themselves. You guys do the work, and then we'll incorporate you afterwards. I don't like that. I think it's scummy, and I think it's just bad practice. Is there anything else? Oh, go ahead.
My grandpa was like, my grandpa, great grandpa, I think, were especially my grandpa, they were like youth labor leaders, I think.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, like Tommy Lee or something.
Awesome. Yeah. Did you have any question or?
I was trying to tell you guys.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. Glad you're here. You got any? What was your question?
Yeah. So it was a very great introduction to the labor union movement.
Yeah.
And then it was a good follow-up of the recent labor union movement. But there's a missing period in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, yeah. I was trying to more just talk about Rutherford's legacy. Rutherford died in 1970.
Right.
So 70s and 80s, yeah, we're not, I didn't really get into. There's a lot there as well. I mean, if you have a specific question,
yeah,
I can maybe
I have two
try to
specific
answer.
questions.
Go ahead. Yeah.
The first is, what's your opinion on the Detroit Revolutionary Union movement and those similarly black radical union movements that emerged outside of the traditional AFL-CIO as, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but as a reaction to basically the Communist Party USA's failure in the 30s, 40s, and to a certain extent even the 50s, to incorporate black workers, especially women, Latinos. So what do you see as an avenue to organize in there? Do you think that those share historical precedents, or do you think it's just like, oh, this is just ultra-left garbage that's distracting from our labor union movement?
No, I think that there are. I don't think it's one or the other. Quite frankly, I think there's a bit more to it. I know that I'm not familiar with the Detroit Revolutionary Union. Yeah, drum. Yeah. I've heard the acronym. I haven't done a lot of reading on the subject, so I don't want to talk about something I haven't read specifically. But I do know in the modern incarnation of this, the modern union movement, in what you said is like things encapsulated within the AFL-CIO and other things like the Teamsters Union, for example. There are things like there's in St. Louis, for example, we have the Alliance of Black Industrial Trades. I might be mixing up the acronyms, but there are special interest groups that union membership rank and file, regardless of what union they are in, regardless what trade they're in. As long as they're a union member of a specific union, they can join these sort of movements, and they do have, they kind of act like sort of, I don't want to say like almost like, they're expressly political groups within the unions that they get together and they discuss, hey, I think that in this union, in this local, I'm facing some issues of racism, whatever. How do we kind of like organize ourselves to like combat this sort of thing? They do have answers for this. I wouldn't say it's, once again, it's quite frankly, it's just that it's trade union members getting together, and just like if you were to form a trade union, they're doing the same thing about an issue of them being trade union members, and they feel like they're facing some sort of prejudice, and they're organizing, and that's perfectly fine and great, and I don't know why I would condemn that at all. That's fine. That's just workers getting together and talking about something they equally all feel. Now, I guess I don't quite understand your question of like what are you asking beyond that, I suppose?
So the first question is just a general question.
Okay.
Just to be answered.
Yeah.
The second question is very much a gotcha question, and there's very clear agenda on it, which is, what do you think of the AFL-CIO's continual support of, for example, the political aspect of the American Empire, the United States? I won't say American Empire.
Yeah. No, I get what you're
and
saying. Yeah.
It's continual and just overarching reactionary character, not just in the United States, which is large, but also its reactionary character worldwide, Nicaragua, take your pick.
No, I get you.
That's all right.
Yeah, so essentially what you're trying to talk about is why do the union bosses continue to organize like the bomb manufacturers?
One additional. What do you think we should do about that? Is there anything we can do about that? And how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I don't think the answer lies within the trade union movement. I think to combat U.S. imperialism, you combat U.S. imperialism, which means you combat the hegemonic state that, facilitates the U.S. imperialism. I don't think that the trade union movement itself, like I said, there's limitations to the trade union movement. It's never going to be a vanguard party. It exists within the economic relations of capitalism. That is the point of the trade union, is that it is a organization of workers getting together to levy their collective concerns about things like pay and their standards of living and things like that. That's all it serves. So when we try to take something, a tool, let's say, like the trade union movement for the working class, and we try to make it do something it just has no business doing, all we're doing is destroying the trade union itself. It's like if you tried to, take a screw off with a hammer. It's just not going to happen. I think that we should respect the trade unions in what they're doing, let them continue doing their thing, but we should not ever think that somehow we are going to control the trade union, that the trade union is going to be some sort of revolutionary vanguard that's going to overthrow capitalism. We should understand and respect the limitations of the trade union, and when it is actively in our interest and in their interest to do so, we should collaborate, and we should try to influence them, and we should try to work with them, and we should elevate their cause. But this idealistic leftist understanding that the trade union is somehow an active motor to destroy imperialism it doesn't hold up. It never has been the case. It's not going to be the case, and it doesn't make any sense. Imperialism is much more complicated than just workers at the bomb factory don't make enough money, that's how the union operates, is the workers at X place don't make enough, they have bad conditions, etc. That's all they cover. You're not going to get a imperialism killer tool out of that. That formula doesn't breed the end of imperialism. What breeds the end of imperialism is a vanguard party, and that's all it's ever been. So Can a trade union be helpful in the formation of a vanguard party? Absolutely. Like I said, these are the schools of these are the schoolhouses for communists. This is where communists should be able to learn skills like how to organize and talk to working class people. How and within that context, it's a very good pool of recruiting people out of. It's a working class organization. Of course, we should be talking to these workers. That's the revolutionary subject. That's who we want in our party. But to think that it itself, as a trade union itself, is going to hamper imperialism beyond just statements, beyond maybe a work stoppage or something, at the most extreme, a strike at Raytheon or something. Anything beyond that is just, it's never going to happen. You need a actual party. You need something that is more than just related to your job, related to your income, related to your survival. It has to go beyond that. It has to transcend. It has to enter the realm of the political. So trade unions are great. Trade unions are great at what they do. They're great at providing for their members, but it's also completely fine in the trade union mind to its members be making a product that's a 5,000-pound FAB that's dropped on the head of Palestinians. It does not matter to them. What matters to them is that the guy making the bomb gets gets compensated right. That's all they care about. That's the whole focus of the union. That's all it is. We shouldn't elevate to the matter of the supreme, the union model. The union model is not enough to actually affect institutional change on that level. So I hope that answered that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I wish you'd elaborate a little bit on the notion of it being a union being a potential schoolhouse for communism.
Yeah, so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Well,
off.
it's just that, it seems like there's the angle for workers to say, hey, the external arm of imperialism is destroying nations as it hollows out your nation.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're going to perpetually have to have this fight.
Yeah.
Until the system changes. Until the system changes, you're going to perpetually have this fight. So is it just...
You hit the nail on the head, though. Well, how is it a schoolhouse for communists? Because you can explain that right there. And that's quite. It's having conversations. It's an organization where workers are already at the point of understanding that they're being exploited enough to actually stand up and take time from their lives to get together, which, I mean, we can all attest to the fact that it's very hard for working class people to have free time. So they're using their free time to organize themselves to actually make an effective change in their own life. Yeah, that's how it's a schoolhouse for communists. These are working class people that are already so close to understanding what's beyond just their own life. They've achieved what Lenin has called trade union consciousness, which is separate from class consciousness because they only see themselves within their own trade. They don't see how these things are all interconnected in a class sense. So it's very easy to take somebody with a trade union consciousness and get them to a position of class consciousness, much easier than somebody who doesn't have trade union consciousness, right? So this is how it's a schoolhouse for communists. Also, it's a schoolhouse. It works in two ways. This is a schoolhouse for communists as in people who don't realize they're communists yet, who have trade union consciousness, who can achieve class consciousness, but it's also a schoolhouse for people who are already communists, people who are workers, who are in a trade union. How many times, are you in a union meeting and you can have a great number of conversations with a great number of different workers just like you? It hones your skills as an organizer, This is how it's the schoolhouse for communists. That's what I mean by that, and that's what Lenin meant by that. So does that answer your question? Or okay. Is there any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.